Hello, everyone watching and listening. Good morning from Sweden this time, and welcome back to the Free Radical Podcast, episode number 9. And this is your host, Swami Padmanabha, here today. Very happy to be in the company of a very special guest, Franciscan nun, scientist, theologian, and many other things we will surely discover today. Ilia Delio. Thank you so much, Ilia, for joining us.
Thank you, Swami. It's great to be here.
So I'll share a few words of Ilia's bio before we dive into today's topic. Ilia Delio, OSF, is a Franciscan sister of Washington, D.C., and holds the Josephine C. Connolly Chair in Christian Theology at Villanova University. She's the author of over 23 books, including The Hours of the Universe, Reflections of God on God, Science and the Human Journey, which won a 2022 Gold Naturalist Book Award, Making All Things New, Catholicity, Cosmology, and Consciousness, finalist for the 2019 Michael Ramsey Prize, and The Unbearable Wholeness of Being, God, Evolution, and the Power of Love, for which she won the 2014 Silver Nautilus Book Award and a 2014 Catholic Press Association Book Award in Faith and Science. She is a founder of the Center for Christogenesis, an online educational resource for promoting the vision of Taylor de Chardin, and more broadly, the integration of science and religion in the 21st century. So I'll be sharing, just for those of you who are connected, the link to her website, christogenesis.org, for those who are only listening. And personally, in my particular case, I got to know about Ilia, I will say a few months ago, relatively recently, by reading some of the books of Father Richard Rohr, where he mentions her in different occasions. And when I met Father Richard in New Mexico last February, also we were talking about her contribution, and then I read her book, The Unbearable Wholeness of Being. And actually, indeed, I'm sharing some parts of that book in my book, Radical Personalism. And then more specifically, I read The Emergent Christ, which basically blew my mind, to be honest. And especially in connection to how Ilia is describing there the idea of an ever-evolving God and therefore an ever-evolving pattern in reality itself, which I found so connected to my own Gaudiya tradition. So it is then that I invited Ilia to my podcast, but then she very quickly defeated me, so to say, by inviting me first to her podcast, which we recorded a few weeks ago, and that will be publicly shared on September 11th, and then on September 18th, the second part. So for those who also would like to tune in and know about her podcast, the name of the podcast is Hunger for Wholeness. There you have the name. It can be found on Spotify and other platforms. So since this Free Radical podcast considerably revolves around the contents of my recent book on radical personalism, I always love to begin our episodes by asking every guest to share a few words of what the term radical personalism means to them. So I don't know if you would like to share a few words, Ilia Delio, what the idea of the term radical personalism means to you as you hear it, basically.
Yeah, I like the term very much. I've always liked the adjective radical, coming to the root of what we are. And I think as I looked at your work, I think, and very, very similar to my own work, what is the root? What is the ground? What is it that we're called into being? I think personhood is not a given. It's something that's a dynamic engagement. And I think that radical personalism is dynamic engagement of our own becoming. We're always becoming person. We're always becoming ever more relational and coming into a greater consciousness of our own being in relation to other, to the larger beingness of life, and coming to that root of what we are, which is an infinite root in my view, mystery of the human person.
Thank you so much. I love it. I especially love the idea of becoming, because so many times we think of ourselves as being, but we do not attach to that the potential of constant becoming. So thank you so much for blessing me with a further layer of purpose into this idea of radical personalism. So today's topic for the podcast, our episode today, will be New Language for the Future. And we chose this title with Elias, as you will soon corroborate. Elias specializes in this theme, so to say, by being herself, I will say, a very dynamic scientist, a very broad-minded theologian, but also because we chose this topic because I personally feel we find ourselves in a zeitgeist where many things or many ways in which we used to do everything, religion included, are being called upon revision, upgrade, or as I like to call, like the GPS says, recalculate. So, so in this connection, I'd like to share a brief section from my book, as usual, on which we will be revolving around. And this section is found in page 85 for those who have the printed edition, and it's called Radical Phraseology. And it says like this: Our Gaudia glossary needs to be revised, upgraded, and recognized. Not only do we need new words for some of our ancient terms, but we also need to understand how some of those notions coexist and apply in our lives today, if at all. We need to unlearn, relearn, and repurpose our old lingo in the context of modernity. We call this radical phraseology. So this above section is the one who inspired the title for today's episode, A New Language for the Future. So, Ilia, I don't know if you have any thoughts that you would like to share to
Yeah,
officially kickstart our session.
right. Thanks, Swami. I fully agree with you that language is that which expresses our understanding of things, the basic content of our existence. And I am concerned sometimes that we use language that has within it meaning from another age, from a past age. Even if we use the term human person, for example, I think we bring into that term a whole host of understanding that we grew up with from our family, from what our religions taught us. For example, from the Catholic perspective, we were taught that God created the human person, male and female, with body and soul. And so many people think I have a body and I have a soul. And so, not paying attention, say, to what science is telling us about the human person, how we might emerge, in this broad stream of biological life. I think that language can deter us from an opening up of understanding in a much broader way. And I think language has two ways of going. It can stifle us and it can liberate us. And therefore, it is important that our language reflects the reality as we understand or are aware of that reality. Words words make a difference.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. I especially resonate with what you mentioned about how language can, to begin with, how language is crafting basically our experience of reality. Is sometimes we underestimate the importance of language and how it defines how we conceive everything, basically.
Yeah.
And also not only because words are not only crucial in our social engagements or conversations with others, but in how we in the inner dialogue we are conducting with ourselves. So if we don't have the proper language to talk to our own selves, what are we telling to ourselves? What are we hearing ourselves? And as you mentioned, in terms of an ever evolving and ever unfolding, any spiritual tradition also I think is, of course, of an ever unfolding nature. So we need a corresponding language that is also ever
Yes.
unfolding.
I also have been influenced by the work of Karen Barad, a physicist who wrote the book Meeting the Universe Halfway, and she builds a whole philosophy based on Niels Bohr's insights in quantum physics. But why I'm telling you this is because she spends a whole chapter talking about the way, especially Western modernity, use language to carve up the world. And so she says, after Descartes, language became mental constructs that we begin to categorize things. And what her whole idea is that we place so much weight on words to the neglect of experience. And therefore, she's saying that in a world that's entangled, where our root reality is deep relationality, we
Hmm.
have to be attentive or present to that deep relationality, which is an experience that goes much more deeply than language alone. And in her view, like if we stay at language, we wind up in little boxes of, what people are and what religions are, and what truth is and who has the truth, and we start arguing and getting into conflict because we're no longer attentive or disconnected from the deeper experience of
Hmm.
belonging together, with
Hmm.
separate reality.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Like I remember I put in my book that we need a journey language. No, we need to speak in terms of we need a language that is this depicting the experiential landscape that we are going through, and not just merely, as you mentioned,
Yeah,
con- constructs and boxes and labels that we know quickly which box to go and put everyone in their corresponding
yeah,
box according to our bias. And even in terms of religion, as you mentioned, with language we can both stifle or liberate. And I remember I put in my work, in my book, we can be rooted in tradition, or also we can be rotten in tradition, to make a play of words.
mm,
In the name of what tradition says, what scripture says, what the words of the book says, and we can end up justifying
yeah.
just about anything.
I think, one of the examples of a great figure, certainly from the Christian tradition, that speaks to this question of language is Francis of Assisi,
Hmm.
great medieval saint. And one of his famous sayings is, preach by your example, but use words when necessary.
Yeah.
And I think we've kind of modified that language, but that saying, but it was a great way of saying, your way of being in the world, your actions, your whole going about the world is much more expressive of what you're thinking, and and who you are, than any language you can use.
Hmm.
And one time he went into a group of Poor Clare nuns, and he was going to give them a sermon, and he walked into the room, and he took a bowl of ashes. He sat in the middle of the circle. He took a bowl of ashes and put it on his head, and he sat there in silence. That
Hmm.
was his sermon. and and I wonder sometimes, that we have so lost the capacity of our own beingness to express the truth of reality, that we keep using a lot of words to explain things. We're such a wordy culture, quite honest, a wordy
Hmm.
world. It's not just any culture. I mean, with the internet now and so much information, just all over the place, people are bombarded by words and ideas, and we're lost in it. We're just kind of drowning in words, and therefore, I think we're losing that depth of meaning that comes from just comes from our own beingness, in the way Francis himself, used words sparingly, like the Desert Fathers and Mothers, again in the Christian tradition, the famous anecdote of the young monk who goes to the elder monk and he says, Father, what must I do to become a saint, to become holy?
Hmm.
And the old man just looks at him and he says, not much. And he said, come back in 3 years. So
Hmm.
the young monk goes away and he says, I fast, I pray, I do good works. He comes back after 3 years and he says to the older monk, Abba, what must I do to become holy, to become a saint? And the man looks at him and he says, come back in 2 more years. And again, time, right? What does time do for us? So
Hmm.
eventually the young monk goes away and comes back. And then on the third try, he says, Abba, I have fasted, I have prayed, I have reflected on my life, I've read the scriptures. What more must I do to become holy? And the old monk stands up and he stretches out his arms and he says, why not be turned into fire?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that, I think, is so powerful in its message.
Hmm.
Um, we use words to talk about a lot of things, but sometimes those words can deflect us from the real power of spiritual transformation. We have to be changed in the core of our being. And that's the greatest message we can give to the world.
I totally agree, and I cannot avoid thinking about so many parallels in our own tradition regarding all the different things you're mentioning, which of course is further confirming about the universality of these principles. Like, for example, when you mentioned St. Francis saying, again, about the most powerful preaching is your own example, and in Sanskrit we have this term prachar, which has to do with speaking to others about the good news, as you all say, the gospel, no? Sharing. And prachar means the word, and achar means one's behavior. So, but the word achar is included in prachar. And pra means a very special type of. So prachar, which is generally translated as preaching, actually means pra achar, a very special type of behavior. And that will be the best type of conveying the message. And I like to say, if you take out the word achar from prachar, you only have PR, which is public relationships, instead of sharing revelation.
Yes.
Yeah, and also in our tradition we have Sri Chaitanya, which we consider he's a manifestation of the divine, and it is mentioned that he converted the greatest logician and scholar in India, not by delivering any discourse, but by sitting in front of him in silence for 7 days. So
Wow.
his silence, he was silent, but the example that was exuding from his pores, the inner world of realization, was spoke by itself, and the greatest logician was fully converted because he was into that fire that you speak of, which interestingly in our tradition it is described that the very first word that sounded that was heard in the universe was tapas, and tapas literally means fire.
Fire.
So that's for us the landmark, the trademark of this whole creation is fire. Enter into it, basically.
I love that. Yeah, fire. That's fire is a great symbol in the Christian tradition as well.
Mm-hmm.
Bonaventure spoke about the burning love of the crucified, a burning love, a love that's a fire transforms.
Yeah.
Right? Fire can destroy as well, though. So it's the kind of fire that might destroy all that is not most deeply personal and transform us into that, the beauty of that radical personalism. So I think, sometimes that we fear fire, quite honestly. We fear what it means to be deeply and radically transformed, to become that radical person that, you so beautifully describe. And we want it. We desire it and we fear it at the same time.
Yeah. And it's paradoxical, as you mentioned, because all of us are crazy mad after love, but love is the most powerful and most transforming thing. Of also, we could say that's the thing we are most terrified about as well, even if we don't know that consciously.
Yes.
We are running after that, but we are running away from that simultaneously.
I agree. I think we so desire love, but we fear the cost of love. In other words, love at its height, it's totally self-involving, right? It's completely kenotic. You have to empty yourself completely into another for the sake of the other.
Yeah.
And we like the lower stages of love where kind of, we feel good about, being loved and loving, and that's not a bad thing. It's certainly the start, but real love is real fire, quite honestly.
Yeah. As I like to say, real love is not a dopamine peak, but actually self-forgetfulness and allowing yourself to be transformed by your openness to the other person. And again, most of us do not want to change, which sounds so basic, like spiritual life is about change. But many of us even start with that spirit in our honeymoon period, but eventually we start to establish ourselves, status quo, and certain perks and comfort zone, and transformation stop being a priority, so to say.
Yes. In fact, I was just talking about this yesterday to my students because the French philosopher Henri Bergson spoke about an élan vital. There's a vital spirit within us. And he says, but what humans do is they resist change. We're always looking in the rear view mirror. We're always looking like one step behind. And there's something about, like you said, we like the way things are, even though we're not completely happy with them. But the fact of radical change radically frightens us. And so we'd rather settle for mediocrity then
Mm-hmm.
really aim for radical transformation, because we don't like the unknown of what that could mean for us. But
Exactly.
that's where I think, the divine element, the divine power within us, we need to trust that, we are loved. We are already loved and held in
Mm,
that love, and
mm,
open, we're invited into the radicality of love itself,
mm,
and I often think, what would our world look like if we could begin to really open ourselves up to trust that radical love already within us and among
mm,
us?
mm. And beautiful. In connection to that, Ilya, I'm thinking also to connect with an important topic I like to touch. We are talking about transformation, and transformation means change. And we were talking in the beginning about the need for sometimes changing, not necessarily the words that we may be using. Sometimes we may need that, but also changing how we are conceiving, transforming our conception of the terms we may be accustomed to use. And in that connection, I wanted to invoke the idea of evolution, since according not only to you and through Christianity, but even to my tradition, everything is in a constant state of unfolding, because that's the very nature of love, and love is the ultimate arbiter of reality, so to say. So I know that you are very much involved into the conception of evolution, and not only evolution of species according to Darwinian theory, but as a root of it, how evolution is taking place to begin with in God's heart, so to say, and that unfolding is reflected in all the other dimensions. So,
Hmm.
so I like to invite you to share a few words according to.
Yes, I think evolution is our root reality, beginning with God. I think, first of all, as you say, Swami, where there is love, there's
Mm,
openness to relationality. And where there's relationship, there will always be change, right? So
yeah.
anything that's alive changes, anything that's dead doesn't change. That's basically how it goes. A
Hmm.
leaf that is dead withers, on the ground. A leaf that's part of a tree that's alive will flourish and blossom, eventually fall and die, and then be reborn. And so I do think change is the name of the game. As someone said, the only constant
Mm,
change.
mm,
The only thing that doesn't change is change itself.
mm, mm,
And we have, I look at the world in which we've constructed, and while it's rapidly changing and we have a very hard time with it, we've never learned how to live in a world of flow. So I think another word for change is flow. I think
mhm,
nature itself, nature is a flow of life, through the cycles of the seasons, through the birth and death of natural elements. But I think in terms of God, and there's so many layers to this conversation, by the way. But in terms of God, I think God is constantly inviting us into the moreness of life. God is constantly, in our hearts, and seeking to become more unified in our lives, so that we may become godly, and therefore God is part of the change. And I think actually our own changing, hopefully, is an evolution or an unfolding toward a higher consciousness of a wholeness, a reality, of love and light that we have the capacity for. And so, Meister Eckhart, the Dominican mystic, said,
mhm,
is the newest thing there is, the
mm,
youngest thing. He said, and
mm,
when we are united with God, we become new again. Uh,
mm,
and I think that quote of Eckhart is so wonderful. God is the newest thing there is, the
mm.
youngest.
Yeah, in our tradition, indeed, we have a term for God that is Nava Yovanam, which means ever new, ever fresh, ever young.
Oh, I love that.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Uh,
that's great, because actually one of my terms for God is ever newness and love.
mhm.
That's
Yeah,
that's my other name for God.
yeah, yeah. And the actual reason we gave for him to be ever new and ever fresh is because he's ever in love, as you mentioned. He's
Ever love.
loving love himself, herself, ever in love. And as I
Yes.
think I mentioned in the podcast we made, and one name for the absolute, for the divine, is Brahman, and the root for the word Brahman comes from Brimhati, which means to expand and to grow. So you ultimately, the expansion and the growth, as you nicely pointed, has to do with the dynamics of love, which is a constant unfolding and a constant unpredictability in the context of love. We also have that idea in our tradition that love moves like in a crooked way, like a snake, implying it doesn't move in a straight line that is predictable.
Yes.
But it's unpredictable in the context of love, of course.
Yes, absolutely, Swami. And I think, two things I'm thinking here. One is Teilhard de Chardin's notion that the core energy of the universe, he said, is love.
Mm-hmm.
That the core love is irrepressible, irresistible, and incomprehensible. We don't really know what love is, but we do know we experience its attractive power, its unitive power, its transcendent power. To love is to become something more in relation to another, and by doing so, to become more myself in that whole, in that ever emerging wholeness. And so, love is a tremendous energy of our cosmic life. Second is love involves suffering. No suffering, no love. And I think sometimes we want sort of a bloodless love. We want a pain-free love. We want the analgesic love. We want love like aspirin. I want the high of love, but I don't want to have to feel the pain of love. But that's the whole point. The beauty of love in its ever evolving purity involves the letting go of those parts of our lives that get in the way of love or that block that love. And this is a mystery, I think, of the human person, that we have the capacity to give ourselves to, out of love for another person, even if we call it sacrifice or martyrdom or something like that, in its physical form. But spiritually, it's, again, I go back to Francis of Assisi. In his idea, he wanted to live not material poverty per se, but living without possessing. He called it living sine proprio. And all the stuff that we possess, we can possess our judgments, our biases, what someone wrote about us on Facebook, or how someone critiqued us, or what someone said about us, or some relationship that happened 20 years ago. We possess these things and we hold on to them, we grasp them, and then we start like building, scenarios around them, and therefore we fail to love. We've never learned to let go, even though we may have been hurt in a relationship. And how do we, in a sense, accept what happened as the past and open ourselves up to the future? And sometimes those past hurts that we hold on to and go over and over and over in our minds block the vitality of love, which our world is, and we ourselves are hungering for.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that reminded when you mentioned the idea of suffering as part of love. Father Richard, he will say that there are two ways to open our heart, and one is great love, another one is great suffering. And of course, he's quick to mention that one is not separate from the other as well, because as you mentioned, in the more you love, the more you suffer, but the more you suffer in love. So I don't want people to get afraid of we are promoting some sort of spiritual masochism or something, because generally many people approach spirituality wanting to stop suffering, as you mentioned, and there is a place for that. Even in our tradition, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is saying there are different people who approach me, God is saying, and one of them is the afflicted one. But eventually the approach has to mature to the point of accepting another form of affliction, which is the one who is part of love, which is there is sweetness in pain. There is the potential of finding sweetness in the pain of love, basically. And I think everyone can have an immediate experience of that with compassion. Now, you identify with someone else's suffering, you make that yours, you suffer, but it's a suffering that does not contract our consciousness, but is expanding it. So I will say, even if some people wouldn't like to think or speak in terms of divine love, even in terms of secular compassion, so to say, we can have a very clear experience of how there is sweetness and expansion in suffering, basically.
Yeah, and just putting this a heart full of mercy, a heart that's open and can
Hmm.
embrace another in their own weakness and their fragilities. Sometimes we don't have to do a lot. It's just being present to another.
Hmm.
That's part of radical personalism, I think. Just
Hmm.
being
Yeah.
a person.
Yeah.
Uh, I think we become overly pragmatic that we have to solve all the problems of the age.
Hmm.
I don't think we ever solve problems. Problems are really about the way relationships work or they don't work. And I think compassion is a beautiful term for that expansiveness of heart. That you have room in your heart to allow your neighbor in or your family member, whoever it is who's suffering.
Hmm.
Not trying to solve their problems, but just saying you are not alone. And I think there's a suffering in suffering sometimes. It's the
Hmm.
suffering of feeling cut off. It's the suffering of feeling isolated. And I think we built a culture of isolation. I mean, we know today from a lot of the news that depression is on the rise. People are lonelier than ever, even though we live in a completely networked world, a wired
Hmm.
world. And you think, how is that possible that we can be more wired than ever before in human history and lonelier than ever before as
Hmm.
well? So there's something that we've lost in this quest for greater power and communication. And I think we've lost the heart, the place of the heart, that expansive center within us. That is the place that makes us person. That's where personhood is rooted like a tree. Those are our roots are in the heart.
Hmm.
And those roots then open up to the mind the ability to be aware of what we are and how we're part of this whole, and then how we experience life in that in this whole, and where love comes in. But I do think that love, Teilhard thought that love alone can bring us to another universe. And I
Hmm.
think if I had to say what would be one way that we can all come together, um, Hindus and Christians and Buddhists and Jews and Muslims and atheists and all peoples that on this planet are seeking the moreness of life. I think the one thing that speaks to every person is love, no matter who you are, where you live on this planet. Every person wants to love, has the capacity to love, and seeks to be loved. It's the language of our common existence, and I think it's our future together.
Yeah, totally agree. That's part of our new language for the future we are talking here about. It's not just merely finding new words, but finding who we are in love and what's the potential for that in our connections with everything and with everyone. So going back for a minute to the idea of evolution, Ilya, I think you quoted in some of your books something from Whitehead. And he will say something like evolution occurs because God is more interested in adventure than in preserving the status quo.
Yes.
I love that quote. I love that quote because I couldn't but think again. I cannot avoid the interfaith dialogue over and over again because
Yeah.
I have to go to our Sanskrit notion of lila. Lila means
Yes.
play. You may
Play.
have heard that, no
Yes.
play. So for us, ultimately, God is playing. I mean, He's
Love that.
completely absorbed and is in self-forgetfulness in divine love and absorbed in play. And even we have a theological point where we mention that God becomes so engrossed in the play of love that He forgets that He's God. No?
I love that idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he still is God, but he forgets. Like if you're the president of the country and you go to your house and your grandson jumps on you and starts to play, you forgot you are the president at that moment.
I
Your your main sense of identity, I am my grandchild's grandpa. You're still the president, but you forgot. So somehow we make that parallel. And when God becomes so much engrossed in love, in the adventure of love, in Whitehead's term, he enters into what we call lila, which is more like a celebratory movement, a dance,
yeah.
a participatory experience. And the designation of God God comes to the background, and the main designation is who He is in loving connection with each one of His
Yes. Yeah.
lovers, so to say.
Beautiful. Yeah. I absolutely love that. That Swami. I came across the term Leela a number of years ago, and I was really fascinated by this notion of divine play, or play, the playfulness of God. And
Hmm.
think, honestly, if I had to do, concentrate on one thing, it would be kind of converting Western theology out of its static metaphysics of like God as some divine being or some
Mm,
big guy in the sky idea, some male guy in the sky idea,
mhm,
watching over us from afar. And I'm like, oh my God, that is so not God. That is that's more like the Wizard of Oz or something. But God is love, and love, as you say, and the dynamism of love, the
mm,
deep relationality of love. God goes out of God to be God with us, and
mm,
that's the beauty. That we're in this play, and I love the idea of play. By the way, I was talking yesterday with my students because Robert Bella, in his book on religion in human evolution, speaks about play in early hominid species as actually the basis of religion itself, because is the basis of sociality. It's the basis of coming together for
mm,
shared being and shared existence.
mhm,
So play means there's an intention to be with another, to share this activity of life, this adventure of life with another, which is, I think, what God is about. Um,
mm,
and therefore, in that intention, you need to be attentive to what you're doing, to be part of the playfulness.
mm,
So, Whitehead had a notion that creativity is the fundamental principle of the universe, not God. So
mm,
God is the highest exemplar of creativity.
mm,
Is that which is who's most creative, but creativity itself actually surpasses God for Whitehead,
mm,
which is really interesting because love, I think the purity of love is really creative. It's constantly bringing into being. The lover is the poet, the artist, the one driven by passion, by desire for the moreness,
mm,
for beauty. And so I love that idea of the playfulness, the adventure of divinity, with us. Like you say, God becomes, in a sense, as Eckhart would say, God becomes not God. Get the God out of the sky,
mhm, mhm.
because that God is playfully in relationship with, calling us into ever greater circles of love.
Yeah. Eckhart was the one who said, "God rid me of God," right?
Pray God to rid me of God.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree with the idea of in order to know him, we have first to
Yeah,
unknow him and get rid of so many even unresolved childhood trauma, father
yes.
figure projection, or whatever dogma we have received or processed or unprocessed, and be willing to rediscover constantly God, not only just one day today after our podcast, but on a daily basis, basically.
I agree, Swami, because I think if we think that God is like the big guy in the sky, who's going to take care of us, we actually we kind of um, we don't take the responsibility then for our own lives. We think, well,
Mhm,
God will do it for me. I'm
mhm.
just going to pray, obey, and God will take care of us.
Yeah.
And that's actually to the detriment of ourselves and the whole world order. It's just the opposite. God becomes not God, to be that power of God, of love within us, to say,
Mhm,
look, you have a choice to make. Do you want to become that radical person, that endless depth of love that that could be turned into fire, that can transform and purify and change what is ugly into the beautiful. You can be part of that,
mm,
and therefore I think a sky god actually takes away responsibility. We have to be responsible radical persons. We have to we have to take we have to make the choice to be a radical person. It's not a given.
You're taking my audience quite far off their comfort zone, Ilya. Thank you so much for that.
I'm sorry.
No, 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 no. I'm congratulating that I making the official mention of that. So that's the official blessing today. Because again, inside our comfort zone, there is no way to ever evolve in connection to God. So I appreciate your point of the willingness to rediscover God and how He's to be found in the playfulness and creativity of love. And in our tradition, even we have a personified expression of divine love, and it's a female divinity, so to say, which is God in a female way, called Radha.
Mm-hmm.
And Radha has loving interaction with Krishna, which will be the male side of the divinity.
Mm-hmm.
In general, our tradition, Radha is given a higher position, so to say, that God himself. It goes again with hand by hand with what Whitehead may say regarding creativity first, so to
Yes.
say.
Oh,
No,
interesting. Oh, that's
love being the one who rules everyone's life, including God's, and he
yeah.
himself is subservient to love. In our tradition, actually, the goal of life is divine love. It's not God. No? I will always make the point. Our goal of life is not God. Is
I
love for God, and
completely agree
God's
with that.
own life. God has also his goal in life, which is also divine love. No, I
I
mean
think it might be
both
Hindu.
God and us share the same goal in life. Sorry, Leah. What?
I said I might be Hindu. I'm not sure. I think I totally agree everything you're
Well,
saying.
many times I hear you and I say I must be Christian. So we are on the same page in that connection.
Yeah, that's really
Yes.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
for me, that's a really reconciling idea. The same thing that is the goal of life for us is the goal of life for God, because that thing that is the goal, which is love, again, is ever evolving, ever unfolding. So you can never fully grasp and capture, okay, I got my goal of life.
Exactly.
It's always two steps ahead, so to say.
Yeah. I put it in this way: every end is a new beginning, and every arrival a new departure. It's always a becoming in love. The other thing I was thinking about, though, as you were talking, Swami, is that this the flow into the ever deeper ocean of love really always requires us to live in terms of evolution, to live a sort of uh, a little chaos can go a long way. I put it this
Mhm.
way. We're
Mm.
always looking for stability, but love always lives on the edge of the future, right?
Mhm.
When you live in love, you're always looking towards what is to come together,
Mhm.
then not yet. And I think, one theory from science that I've been influenced by is that from chaos theory. Chaos
Mhm.
theory is living in that openness, that open system of order within disorder. And
Yeah.
so order is always kind of temporary. It's what fluctuates in this moment for the ongoing livability of life. But if we're attentive, there's always kind of a strange attractor somehow forming, a new basin of attraction that's pulling us in a new
Mm.
direction.
Mm.
And chaos theory says, over time, strange attractors take on a greater gravity of power within the system, and it can pull the system into a whole new order. And I think that love works that way. If we really are attentive to divine love within us, it's like a strange attractor. And then if we allow ourselves to be pulled into that new pattern of life that love is offering to us, we can over time become a new type of person, a new being. And that's what I think evolution's about. It's the emergence of new patterns of order, new
Mm.
ways of being, driven by, you might say, the openness of life to more life.
Yeah. But for that, I think we will need to redefine, not redefine, but reconceive words like chaos, because people hear chaos and say, no, no, thank you, I don't want that.
Yes,
Instead of translating chaos, as you mentioned, as openness, potential, possibility, all of which are deeply tied to the idea of love. So
exactly.
in other words, you want love, but you don't want chaos. Means you don't want love actually, or you don't understand what love is about. And yeah, in fact, I dedicated one part of chapter in my book to speak about chaos and order and the importance of balancing both. Of course, we are not promoting here just sheer chaos 100%,
No,
but too much order can be also suffocating, and it can lead to, let's say, in potential, too much order is a totalitarian regime or
yes,
dictatorship. Everything is in order, in place, no unpredictability, and it can be hell in its own way.
yes, I agree. And I think the type of
Mm.
chaos you're talking about there, the kind that seems completely disruptive, chaos in a closed system, chaos where everything, this total disorder, but it's bounded, the system is bounded and there's nowhere for, so everything kind of begins to break down. But an
Mm.
open system is a permeable system. And
Yeah.
I think, that's what we mean, that if there's an openness to the environment. So life is messy. I mean, we don't have to, you don't have to spend too much time dwelling on that one, because it's always because life is unfinished. In terms of evolution, we live
Mm,
in an unfinished universe. We are unfinished persons. We're not
mm,
finished persons who haven't gotten it, who failed. We're unfinished, and we're in the process of becoming.
mm.
That's why to live as an open system is to live within the unfinishedness of life that is moving towards, a type of completion. Um,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
gives us a whole new, you might say, a ticket to be okay with the fact that things don't work out sometimes, or that life breaks down. Something new is always on the horizon if we're
Yeah.
attentive to it.
Yeah, that reminds me, one of my teachers, Srila Siddhar Maharaj, will say, the closer you get to the infinite, the more you will realize there is no limit to perfection, there's no limit to progress, in connection to your notion of unfinishedness. Now, the
Yes.
closer you get to the infinite, you realize there is infinite potential for progress. So you can just touch one point in an infinite line, but you can never capture it all. And I think that for many of us, it's a little bit terrifying, in the sense that many of us are not accustomed to deal with what we don't know, with the unknown. And when we even speak about potential, who we are in our becoming, in our potential, we could say, of course, we have a pretty dark potential. We have a potential to go to very dark places, for sure. We know that, but also we have the potential to go to beautiful, bright places. But just because our brightest potential is unknown to us, we may be terrified about that. Just because we don't know, we don't, whatever we don't know, generally we are terrified of, even if it's our brightest potential.
Yes. No, that's absolutely true. And I think that terror of the unknown is the fear of nothingness. I mean, because here we have something, we have our own existence, we have our lives. Maybe they're not the best of what we would hope for, but here they are, and we know them, we're comfortable enough. But being called into the unknown, that future of darkness, but that's where I think faith, do we really have trust in a divine power of love? I think, do we have faith? Faith is that there's no logic, there's no reasoning, but there's an assent that I believe, that this power of love will not let me go. And that this power of love, whatever it brings me into the future, will be there for me, and will be ever more if I open myself up to it. Because you're right, we live between, some writers say we live between animal and angel. If we look at the scale of evolution,
Mm,
in terms of biological evolution, we're
mm,
emerging out of a long trajectory of biological life that is
mm,
very, very messy, I might add. So fantastic in terms of biological life. We've had 5 major extinctions on Earth.
mm,
Some say that we're in the 6th extinction. In terms of cosmic life, we've had major cataclysmic events. I mean, asteroid collisions and this type of thing. And yet here we are. Isn't that fantastic? After 13.8 billion years, here we are, even on Earth, 3.2, whatever it is, 4 billion years of life on Earth. Here we are after massive, massive destructions,
mm.
after what seems to be a total wipeout of life. And yet we're here to talk about love and the future. That to me is so fantastic that no scientific principle could ever really approach. And there's something about the infinite that's already in our midst. And as
Mm.
you say, we can never really grasp it. We're not meant to grasp the infinite. It is, in a sense, the light that pulls us ever more onto the fullness of life,
Mm.
that wholeness of life, that fecundity, like the flowering of life,
Mhm, mhm,
which I think for our Christian language, the term heaven, points to. But I also think that's not an other world, that this earth, this planet actually has that potential. And I think oftentimes we have so underestimated the power of life on this planet for the moreness of life. And it's one thing, my hope, my greatest hope, is that we can bring our spiritual energies together in the power of love to evoke, to bring out what we have the capacity for.
mm. Thank you. Beautiful. And I agree that we have to, all this capacity and all this beautiful potential that is just knocking at our door here and now, not in a future time in a far distant land. In many ways, it's impossible to fully grasp, and we have to be okay with coexisting with that mystery. Well, that's a way for me to define faith, like having patience with mystery, and patience is being waiting while trusting. And like
Absolutely. Yeah.
I always recall when Father Richard will say the opposite of faith is certainty. No? Like making this point that we have to coexist with uncertainty, and in that way be retain and recover, if you will, this spirit of awe and astonishment that so much characterizes the vision of the enlightened one, the childlike mentality, or like in Buddhism, they will say the Shoshin, the beginner's mind. In our own tradition, our teacher will say we are students forever. And in this connection, I would like to wrap up. We are getting closer to our conclusion with one topic that also I know you are very expert in sharing with us, which is technology. And we are talking about the new language for the future. And since we are talking here about the importance to coexist with mystery and paradox, I connect this with technology in the sense that one of the main issues for me, and of course there may be so many, but is that technology is such an incredible thing. I mean, we are doing this conversation. I'm surrounded by technology here, although you cannot see almost any of that. and I don't have the minimum clue of how this is constructed, what's invested behind this. So the point is, for me, it's a very delicate danger that we get accustomed to the extraordinariness of technology and we lose sight of the wonder that is behind that. We have in our pockets a cell phone, which is extraordinary in itself in many ways, but we get accustomed to that and even demand upgraded versions of it and so on. So for me, that's one of the most delicate things to navigate. So much extraordinariness, but so quickly getting accustomed to that
Yes.
and losing awe and astonishment, which for us in our tradition we say rasa sar chamatkar, which means astonishment is the juice of life. So
Yeah.
I don't know what you can share in that connection.
About this.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
I have a lot to say about this.
Yes, please bless us.
I'm actually teaching a course right now on technology and human evolution. So this comes at a timely point. Technology, one thing I want to just say is that nature has always been techne. So, it's not that humans are technological, it's that nature's technological. Clams have little clamshells, and beavers build dams, and life has always harnessed the materials in its environment to optimize life. So one thing I think about technology is life seeks more life, and therefore techne are the tools that are useful for the optimization of life. But life is also, nature itself is also pluripotential. It can be mastered into or turned into something, which is something what poetry does. It evokes the power or the potential within something to be something more. So I think technology is emerging out of human personhood, and quite honestly, I think computer technology actually emerged in the 20th century, the midst of the 20th century, in the midst of a very, very violent century. A century of profound war and suffering and death. And I think one of the things that was, can we find a way out of ourselves? Like, there's something about us that has become so thwarted and turned in to become destructive, so utterly destructive. And so this idea of extending the mind into a machine, was first an experiment by Alan Turing and later now turned into a whole, productivity of devices and corporations. Now, technology is both good and not so good, right? It's fantastic. Look what it can do. Here we are, Sweden and Pennsylvania brought together in a single conversation. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly creative. It's incredibly imaginative. And it goes to show we have the power to do new things. We have the power to imagine something, to create it, and then to bring it into existence. That is a human power, distinct from the animal world. And therefore, we have to wonder, well, what do we want with this power of being able to create technology? Unfortunately, I think a lot of technology, especially like movements of radical transhumanism, want to become gods. There's a sense of God is the problem, not the solution. And here I think they're talking about the Judeo-Christian tradition God, the big guy in the sky god, saying basically religion has failed and technology will fulfill what religion promises. So technology now can bring about our happiness. We can save ourselves. We can live on, we can download our brains. We can live on forever, digital immortality and all these ideas. The one downside is that we're so preoccupied with what technology can do for us. As you say, we've lost the sense of wonder. So a lot of kids, Gen Zs, they're on their phones. So we have the exoskeletal life. My phone is part of who I am. So I live my life. If you take my phone away, you take my soul away, basically.
Yeah.
And this is a problem because we're losing the capacity for interiority, the ability to be at home with ourselves, to be in silence and not constantly inundated by information. We are enamored by the fact that technology can do something more for us. Now we have Chat GPT, so I don't have to think about writing an essay. I can just go to Chat GPT-4. So we're exporting our minds onto our devices. This actually will have negative consequences. We're actually thinning out the whole frontal cortices of the brain. So the brain is changing as we speak using technology. And part of the reason, and here I'm going to put a little bit of the burden on religions that have been too passive in the whole discussion of technology and its development. I do think we have sort of taken a laissez-faire attitude and we've let corporations sort of monitor where technology is going to take us, but we're heading for a very strange future. I think we need to engage in the question, what do we want with technology? And what does religion offer that technology cannot? What is so valuable and what is infinitely valuable about the human person and the quest for radical personalism that technology cannot address, it cannot attain. Terre Desjardins basically thought technology is fantastic. It can unify us. It can help create a more planetized consciousness around the globe. But without love, it can lead into a disastrous future. I just saw the movie Oppenheimer, where technology, fantastic on one hand, and then the utter destructive power it potentially has on the other hand. So, yeah.
Interesting that you quoted the movie, which I was thinking also about watching, because Oppenheimer, when the bomb was tested, he actually quoted a verse from the Bhagavad Gita. And you didn't know that, but of course the Bhagavad Gita is not promoting the creation of nuclear atomic bombs, but somehow he related that to that, and that also shows me the other way around. You can use a sacred text as an atomic bomb, or you can use technology, so to say, as something sacred. No, so both things have this potential, and I was thinking about that, as you mentioned, as technology advances, we need to advance internally to be on the same level with technology, because if technology advances to the point of even offering us some level of emotional feedback, if you will, in some way or another, if we are not upgrading our humanity to understand that technology will never be able to provide us actual love, as you mentioned, technology will offer us some sense of flat humanity, so to say, and that will be enough for us, because we will be quite flat ourselves, and we won't be able at one point to distinguish between what the robot can offer us in terms of feedback and relationality and what a human can offer. At one point, everything will be totally blurred and it will be the same.
That's absolutely correct, Swami. In fact, what's predicted is that Ray Kurzweil says by 2045, we'll have so merged with our technologies, we'll have exited our species, Homo sapiens, and we'll be an entirely new species, techno sapiens. And the question is, do we want that kind of future? Do we want to exit? Do we want to go past our humanity into some kind of robotically driven or technologically mediated existence? We have to engage that question seriously, and religions have to step up and say there's a spiritual dimension to us that cannot be supplanted or replaced by a technological device, and we need to spell that out, what this means for our existence, for our planetary existence, for our life together.
Yeah. So I think that the role of spiritual traditions is more crucial than ever in connection to what technology is offering us potential in both directions, so to say. So we have big responsibility. Ilya, we are getting to our close. I don't know if you would like to share any concluding thoughts, anything you may like to share before we wrap up regarding today's topic, what we have been sharing.
Thank you, Swami. I mean, first of all, I so appreciate your work and for opening up the Hindu tradition to me, the spirituality of Hinduism, and it's so beautiful. Really, I really want to learn more about it, and just to find out, my teacher, your cousins, used to say, "We look like we're separate, but in our roots, we're really part of the same cosmic wholeness." And I think as we trace these traditions down to our root reality, it is love that binds us together. And we are one in that heart of divine love. So, my prayer and my hope is that we can continue to share, the fruits of what we're coming from to work together towards a new reality of love. That love itself is much more powerful than any technological device. And I think if we can maybe harness that power of love for the future of our planetary existence together, then we may not need our cell phones in the future.
Yeah, love will be the ultimate technology.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Ilya. I will share one more time before we conclude the contact. For those who would like to know more about her work, you can visit christogenesis.org. And also, she has her podcast called Hunger for Wholeness. So, thank you so much, Ilya, for coming. And we will meet each other with all of you next Saturday at 10 a.m. EDT time. This time, I will be having as my guest Rory McEntee. This whole month of September, I will be inviting different practitioners from other traditions, other quote unquote. As you can see, Ilya is a Hindu and I'm a Christian, basically, as we can see. So we'll be talking with Rory McEntee, the co-author of a book called The New Monasticism. And the title of our podcast will be The New Monasticism. So we will continue our conversation of a new language for the future, new monasticism, so on and so forth. So thanks so much to all being present. Thanks so much, Ilya, for being with us. A great blessing. And see you all very soon. Thank you so much.
Blessings.